Rent was due in 6 days, and my tips jar looked like a joke someone forgot to laugh at. The blue tilt smelled like old wood, orange peel, and rain dragged in by coats from the street. Bulls highlights looped on mute above the bar, while the Blackhawks game bled captions no one read. Ice cracked in the well, the espresso machine hissed like it had an opinion about my life choices. And some finance kid in a Patagonia vest decided to call me fun size because I needed a milk crate to reach top shelf bourbon. I smiled. The customer, service kind that never touches your eyes, climbed the crate, grabbed his bottle, and poured 2 fingers so even he couldn't complain. He waggled the glass at my name tag like he'd discovered fire. Aria, right? Cute. You from around here or imported? I swallowed the heat and put down a coaster. From around here. He smirked and said something about the South Side that wasn't meant kindly. I turned to the next order before the words under my tongue turned into career sabotage. The thing about Chicago rain is it changes the way people hear each other. Boots heavy, voices louder, patience thinner. The door kept coughing in cold air. And with it came a little girl in a yellow raincoat. Maybe 8. Eyes too big for the room. A damp curl stuck to her cheek. She was holding the sleeve of a woman who looked tired enough to sleep standing up. The kind of tired you only get from working 2 jobs and chasing buses that come late. The kid flinched when the bar back dropped a rack of glasses. Not a normal jump, the kind that keeps you vibrating. She tucked her chin, shoulders rigid, fingers fluttering near her jaw. I've seen panic like that. EMT class teaches you the textbook. Life teaches you the rest. I slid over with water and a lime and the most normal voice I own. Hey, you good? It's loud in here. You want a quiet corner? The woman pressed a hand over the girl's. She's deaf, she said softly. We were early for the bus and she got overwhelmed. She looked like she was bracing for judgment, the kind I've watched too many times. I shook my head and signed high, safe, quiet, not elegant, but clear. The girl's eyes snapped to me, wild, then curious. The room fell away. I signed slower. Open palms, nothing sharp. Breathe with me. Then, out of habit, instinct, muscle memory I hadn't used in months, I gave a small circular motion at the collarbone and flicked my fingers out. A private little name, sign I'd learned years ago from an older woman at a community center on 26th. I'd used it to coax tense kids into laughing. The woman used to tell me, "For my boy." This was his sign when he was little. He'd scowl if I didn't. I never met her son. I just kept the motion like a lucky penny. The girl traced the motion back at me, shaky, then steadier, and let out the breath she'd been holding. We matched inhales, 3 slow counts, and the buzz of the bar receded. I showed her the quietest booth, the one near the back where the brick wall soaks up sound. She climbed in like she was docking a small boat after a storm. I brought fries. If you've never watched a kid recalibrate with a French fry, you're missing proof that salt and grease are part medicine. Her mom mouthed, "Thank you." I signed anytime and set a small paper cup of ketchup like a peace treaty. Behind me. The manager cleared his throat with that meaningful, managerial heaviness. Vince likes to pretend Blue Tilt is a cathedral where he guards the hymnal. Lane, he said, using my last name the way cops do. Less babysitting, more pouring. Table 6 is empty and looking at me like it's my fault you're slow. The finance kid snorted. My jaw clicked, but I kept my hands still. There's a ledger in this city you can feel without seeing, a tab you keep of who talks down to you and who looks you in the eye. I thought I'd keep my head down, ride out the shift, then go home to my tiny place and my EMT textbook and my rent math that never adds up. But then the door opened and a different kind of weather walked in. 2 men in dark coats, the kind tailored to hide how many things they can hide, paused just inside, scanning like they'd learned the habit young. One stood a half the step behind the other, and you could tell without trying which one people usually moved for. He was early 30s, tall, not Jim, pretty but built like he took punches in a language without vowels. His hair was cut clean, his tie was not from a mall. When his shoes hit the floor, the noise in the room rearranged. I didn't look up long. I had orders and bills and a boss who would invent new ways to say pick it up. but he kept the edge of my vision like a draft through a closed window. He was already turning toward the bar when the little girl chirped a laugh from the booth. This small bell of sound you couldn't buy. I glanced back. She was showing me a drawing on a napkin. My milk crate turned into a throne. I laughed for real. I couldn't help it. She signed Queen and stuck a fry in the air like a scepter. Without thinking, I repeated that tiny name, sign at my collarbone again and saluted her. She grinned like we'd made a pact. That's when the man stopped walking. Not slowed, stopped. His bodyguard took half a step, confused, then froze because the look on the man's face said a line had just been drawn in chalk that only he could see. He watched my hands like they were saying his name. His eyes, dark, watchful, went somewhere else for a second, then came back so fast I felt it in my chest. He changed direction and came straight to the service gap where we enter and exit the bar. Luca, the bouncer who's seen everything, shifted without being told. I could feel Vince's stare heat the back of my neck. The finance kid whispered, oh, like a toddler watching a plate fall. "Excuse me," the man said, voice low and Chicago, clean, like Lake Michigan on a windless morning. "Where did you learn that sign?" I kept my face calm and my hands at rest. People are always measuring you when they ask a simple question with too much gravity. "Which one?" I said, keeping it light. "HI?" He almost smiled, and the almost made it worse. "Not high." He lifted his hand, careful, almost reverent, and made that same small circle at his collarbone, the one I thought only a handful of people had ever used. My mouth went a little dry. Behind him, the bodyguard clocked everything and nothing, peripheral vision like a net. "Community center on 26th, I said. "A woman named Elena used it for her son. She told me it worked when he was mad and wouldn't listen." The name touched something in his face like a match finds wick. He blinked. "One?" "Elena," he said, like the syllables were a door he hadn't opened in a while. He stepped in closer, but not enough to make it a problem. "I'm not here to make a scene. He stopped because the girl in the booth was watching him, and he could feel it. He softened his voice the way you do when you know loud isn't the answer. "I haven't seen that sign in years." Vince popped into the pocket of space between us with a smile made of receipts. "Sir, if you need a table, I can..." The man didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on me like we'd already agreed on the terms of whatever this was. It should have made me nervous. It didn't. It made me steady. "My name's Nico," he said finally. "Nico Moretti." Of course it was. Every bartender in the city learns names the way EMTs learn blood types. Some names come with allergies, some with histories, some with radios that go quiet when they enter. I heard the finance kid swallow. I thought I would smile, say nice to meet you, and pretend we were two regular people in a regular place. But then he said something I didn't expect. Something that landed so heavy even the espresso machine seemed to shut up to listen. "Only one person ever used that sign for me," he said, "and she's been gone a long time." He didn't ask again where I'd learned it. He didn't have to. The room tilted a fraction. The little girl lifted her fry, scepter, like she knew about coronations and grief. My hands itched to sign "I'm sorry." And I remember her even though I didn't. I remembered the way that woman, Elena, had laughed when I got a finger position wrong, corrected me, then told me this sign calmed thunderstorms in a small boy's chest. "Aria," Vince said behind my shoulder. Acid. Sweet. "Table 6. I didn't turn. It wasn't defiance. It was triage. You don't walk away from a moment like this. The ledger in my head turned a page. "I thought I'd just get through another Tuesday," I said quietly, more to myself than to him. But I guess tonight decided to be different. Nico's mouth twitched like he wasn't allowed to smile, and did it anyway. "Yeah," he said. It did. He didn't ask for a drink. He didn't flash cash or name drop. He just pointed once at the booth where the girl sat and asked with his eyes if he could approach. I nodded. He kept a respectful distance, signed hi to her, clumsy, earnest, and she beamed like a lighthouse. He touched his collarbone, the sign so small you'd miss it if you blinked. The girl mirrored him and giggled. He nodded thanks to me like I'd returned something that had been missing for years. When he came back to the bar, he didn't waste time. "I'm not trying to drag you into anything you don't want," he said. "But I need to ask you something real. Not here, not loud." I stared at the milk crate, at the tip jar, at the rain making a mirror of Damon Avenue. I thought I'd finish my shift, count quarters, and fall asleep with my EMT workbook open to airway management. The thing I didn't expect was a man with two still eyes and a history stitched into the city's concrete, asking me about a sign only a mother and her son should know. He set a simple card on the rubber mat, no logo, just his name and a number, and waited. I didn't pick it up. Not yet. I needed to breathe the way I'd taught that girl to. In for 3, hold for 2, out for 4. "Okay," I said finally. "Ask." He looked past me to the little girl, then back like he was borrowing her courage. "Wherever you learned that," he said, voice low, steady. "I think it's the start of something I can't ignore." I told myself I was just saying yes to a few hours of ASL consulting so I could keep the lights on and pass my next EMT quiz, not signing up to orbit a man whose name made half the room sit up straighter. The Moretti Foundation office was in a rehabbed brick building in the West Loop. Exposed beams, plants that didn't know they were dying, a neon do-good sign that felt like it came with an apology. A woman in a camel blazer with a voice like a podcast introduced herself as Kelly and tried to hand me a glossy deck about inclusive community partnerships. I set it aside and asked where the ADA files were. She blinked like I'd asked where they keep the bodies. "We're super compliant," she said, which is something only people who aren't say. I flipped through their intake forms and found the greatest hits. No spot for preferred interpreter platform. No space for relay numbers. A line that said hearing impaired like it was still 1994. The door to the conference room didn't have a lever handle. The fire alarm had no strobe. The video remote interpreting contract was with some budget service in a different time zone that drops calls on windy days. I kept my face neutral and took a breath. "Okay," I said, like a nurse says before a shot. "Let's fix this." I talked them through the basics like I'd done at the community center on 26th. Real access is not a ribbon cutting. It's a checklist. And sometimes it's also a mirror. Nico sat at the end of the table the way people sit when they're listening and choosing what not to say. He didn't interrupt me to perform his own empathy, which was a relief I didn't know I needed. Kelly tried to cut in twice. "We already spoke to our legal." And I nodded and said, "Great, then this will be fast," and kept going. I showed them how to add a field for interpreter preferences, how to set up a text, only line, why you don't use hearing impaired, unless you want to start a fight in the parking lot. I asked who their go-to ASL agency was for in-person events. Kelly said, "We have a volunteer who took a class." I looked at Nico. He didn't look away. "Hire pros," he said. Today. The room shifted an inch toward useful. On my way out, a maintenance guy in a socks cap was swapping a knob for a lever on the conference door. He winked without looking up. "Should have been like this already," he said. "We're late to a lot of things," I said. And he chuckled like we were both in on the same slow joke. On the sidewalk, the West Loop smelled like coffee and money. Nico walked me to the curb like a gentleman in an old movie who also might own the studio. "If this ever feels like a PR stunt," I told him, "I'm out." He nodded once. "It's not," he said, "or it won't be." Then he did the thing that counts more than statements. He reached for his phone. "Hire the interpreters," he told Kelly. "Get the strobe installed. If the landlord has a problem, tell him it's cheaper than a DOJ settlement." I thought that would be the shape of the day. Policy, forms, good advice nobody likes hearing. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Ms. Rivera at the center. "Got a kid who saw something at the river. Deaf. Won't talk to cops. Might talk to you." I checked the time. I had an EMT skills lab at 7, a double at the bar tomorrow, and rent math that still looked like a dare. "I need to stop by Pilsen," I said. "Can your driver take me?" Kelly's eyebrows climbed. Nico didn't blink. "Luca will go with you," he said, "in case the center needs extra respect." I wanted to roll my eyes. I didn't. No extra, I said. Just stand back and don't scare anyone. Pilsen in late afternoon is murals and tamales and kids riding scooters like they've got diplomatic immunity. The center smelled like bleach and crayons and the kind of hope that limps but doesn't quit. Ms. Rivera hugged me like a daughter she forgot she had. "You look tired," she said, then shoved a banana and a granola bar at me like she'd been waiting to. She guided me to a small room where a boy was drawing on butcher paper with a marker he'd smuggled out of an art class. His name was Jameer. He had that look deaf kids sometimes get when they're outnumbered by sound. Chin up, eyes sharp, hands quick. His mom sat stiff in a chair with her purse on her lap like a seatbelt. Jameer flicked his fingers in a half order. "You sign?" I smiled and signed back, "Yes." "Slow, you lead." His shoulders dropped a millimeter. It took 20 minutes to get the shape of it. They were at the Riverwalk by Canalport. Mom needed air. Jameer liked the vibration of trains crossing in the distance. He noticed two men near the water where the trucks back in at night. Jameer didn't have sound, but he had eyes like a hawk on caffeine. He watched them greet each other, not like friends, more like officials. And then, this was the part he kept drawing. One man made a quick, almost nothing movement with his fingers while they shook hands. A curl of the index, a brush of thumb to knuckle, a weird half tilt that didn't read as a twitch. Jameer signed, "Looked like number, but not number." And I felt the hairs on my arm stand up. He drew it again, slower. When he finished, he tapped the paper like, "Pay attention. This is the part that matters." His mom shifted, uneasy. "We don't want trouble," she said out loud, voice thinning on the edges. I nodded. "You won't get trouble from me." I filmed Jameer's hands with my phone, then made the shapes myself so he could correct me. He clapped once when I got the angle right. Lucas stayed in the hallway like we asked. Big and quiet, a bruise blooming on his cheek from a life I didn't ask about. When we left the room, Nico was leaning against the far wall pretending he wasn't nervous. He didn't approach. He let me come to him. "You get it?" he asked. I showed him the video, then the drawing. He didn't move for the longest beat. "You think that's anything?" he said. And it wasn't skepticism, it was fear of being wrong about the shape of the monster. "I think it's not nothing," I said. "It looks like a hand cue built out of pieces from ASL numbers and dock worker signals. Not clean ASL, close enough to hide inside a handshake if you know what to look for." We drove to the South Branch so Jameer could point to where he'd been. The sky pressed low, and a tugboat complained downstream. Luca bought us bodega coffee that tasted like cardboard and comfort. A guy in a Carhartt beanie feeding stale bread to ducks told us stories about how the river used to freeze for real, and how he once pulled a drunk out with a rake. When he saw me trying to measure distance with my eyes, he pointed with his chin. "Camera's on that lamppost. Don't work half the time unless it's windy. Then it sees everything." Not helpful. Not nothing. I texted Ms. Rivera to thank Jameer and told her we'd set him up with a better tablet for school because I'm not above bribing fate. Back at the foundation, I pulled the footage from a nearby business that actually maintained their cameras because the owner's daughter uses a wheelchair and knows what negligence costs. The angle was trash, but the timing told a story. A box truck with plates we could read slid into frame and out again in under 3 minutes. The handshake happened before it arrived, not after, which meant they weren't greeting. They were confirming. I froze the video on a blur of a sleeve with a stitched cuff. Tailoring like that lives on a short list in this city. I sent the still to a friend who works alterations in River North. She texted back one word, "DeLuca." I didn't breathe for a second. Lots of men wear good suits. Lots of tailors know lots of names. Coincidence is a hobby people lean on when the truth doesn't feel safe. I laid the drawing on the table next to my phone and traced the motions again. Index curl, 2. Thumb brush, 5. Half tilt, dock lane. A little wrist knock that could be a time code if you wanted it to be. My EMT brain likes systems. My bartender brain likes tells. Together, they got loud. "It's a coordinate," I said. "Not GPS, but close enough to meet a truck without texting it." Kelly hovered at the doorway, pale and fascinated the way people get when the movie in their head becomes the room they're standing in. That seems speculative, she said. I looked at Nico. He wasn't pale. He was the color of someone who has already decided that whatever we were about to do would cost. Speculation keeps people alive, he said. Then to me, can you teach me to see what you saw? Quickly. I wanted to make a joke about day rates, about overtime, about how I get paid in cash and caffeine and prayers my landlord will take a check. Instead, I nodded and put his hands where mine had been. His fingers were steadier than I expected. We stood too close over a piece of butcher paper in a room that smelled like toner and fresh paint, and I showed him how someone could hide a number inside a greeting if they needed to act like nothing was happening. He learned fast. Muscle memory is different when your body has already memorized violence. He glanced at the still frame my friend sent. Just once. If it hit him the way I think it did, he didn't let it show. That restraint is its own language. On my way out, Vince texted me to pick up an extra shift because someone called off with food poisoning, which is what bartenders say when heartbreak looks like tequila. I told him I'd be there. Nico walked me to the elevator and didn't pretend this wasn't terrifying. You didn't have to do any of this, he said. I thought about Jameer's mom with her purse seatbelt and the way Jameer kept tapping his drawing like it was a lighthouse. I kind of did, I said. Some of us have to be the person we needed when we were 8. The elevator dinged. He touched his collarbone without thinking and stopped himself halfway, like the habit still surprised him. Thank you, he said, simple as a clean glass. I stepped in and told him the most honest thing I'd said all day. I thought this would be paperwork, I said. Turns out it's a map. I didn't sleep much the night before the sit down. It wasn't nerves, not exactly. It was that crackling feeling you get before a thunderstorm when every surface throws off static. I spread butcher paper on my tiny kitchen table, rewound the river footage until my phone got hot, and drew the handshake again and again until my wrist ached. By morning, I had 3 versions that made sense and one that felt like a stretch, and a note to myself that said, if you're wrong, be wrong, loud and honest. The inner circle met in a rehabbed warehouse that smelled like coffee and fresh drywall, the kind of place where money launders itself by hanging Edison bulbs. Luca checked the hallway twice and then held the door for me like it was a church and I was the priest. I caught a couple looks from men who've never had to prove they belong anywhere. One of them, slick hair, expensive cologne that gets louder when he's scared, offered a smile with teeth. The bartender's here to teach class? Yeah, I said, laying my paper down at the head of the table like it had a badge. Attendance is mandatory. Nico didn't sit at the head. He sat a little off-center where he could see the door and the faces. He didn't introduce me. He didn't need to. People knew who I was now, if not by name. By the new fact that when I spoke, he listened. I started simple because simple gets remembered under stress. This isn't about language purity, it's about camouflage, I said. If you want to hide a number, you hide it inside something no one questions, like a handshake. I drew the shapes again, index curl, thumb brush to knuckle, that half tilt of the wrist. On their own, these mean nothing. Together they say a place and a time if you know the code. It's not clean ASL. It's a mash up of doc signals at ASL numbers and somebody's bad idea of subtlety. Slick hair cleared his throat like he wanted to play defense. Lot of handshakes in this town, he said. Lot of wrists. He made a lazy little gesture. Man talk for you're reaching. I didn't look at him. I pointed at the frozen frame where a sleeve edge caught light. Then explain this, I said. Hand stitched Milanese buttonhole, navy VBC wool. That's a River North Taylor signature. I sent this still to a friend, and she threw one name back at me without blinking. I didn't say the name out loud because the room already had it in its throat. Nico's face didn't move. He'd been like that since I walked in. Every part of him still but his eyes. He looked at the paper the way a person looks at X, rays of their own ribs, scanning for a crack they can't feel yet. Show me the rest, he said. So I did. I put Jameer's drawing down with my phone, played the video of his hands, slow enough to see the 90-degree angles where the cue shows itself because math doesn't care about your feelings. I lined that up with the box truck plates, the timestamp, the lane map. They meet here, I said, tapping the corner of the map like a metronome. Q says lane 5, time window at 21:10. The truck backs down exactly then. No one texts anything. If you pull tower pings, you'll still see the phone sleeping, but the truck is on camera from the lamppost across Damon. Speculative. Slick Hair tried again. Softer, like he understood he was arguing with gravity. I added one more piece I'd held back, because leverage only works if you don't spend it too early. And it lines up with a call made from a prepaid SIM that hit a tower along I-55 at 8:41 and dropped off by 8:49 near Canalport. That SIM has had exactly 4 calls in the last month, all within a 20-minute window before trucks like this move. He blinked like I'd thrown cold water. How do you even... Because people who can't afford to be heard still leave footprints, I said. Also, Chicago traffic exists. You can't get from St. Rita's fundraiser in Beverly to this river in that window with the ramp closure at Pulaski unless you've got lights and sirens or a helicopter. And last I checked, your name isn't CFD. Luca's mouth did a small thing it does when he wants to smile, but remembers he works in a room where smiling reads as disrespect. Kelly hovered in the doorway with a stack of papers she wasn't sure were worth anything anymore. The rest of the men in the room did what men do when the floor shifts. They checked their feet. A side door opened then, and Matt walked in, like he owned the right to be late. He looked good in the way money looks good. Everything fitted, nothing accidental. He saw me at the head of the table and did a quick little double take before pasting on a grin meant for pictures. "Morning," he said to the room. Then to Nico, with a nod that would have been a hug if they were different people living a different life. "What's the emergency?" No one answered. He took the empty chair across from me and glanced at the paper like it was a menu he'd already read. His eyes flicked to the frozen frame of a sleeve, then to my phone, then to Nico's face. He hid the flinch well. "We're doing arts and crafts now?" he said lightly. "Cute." I stayed with the facts because the fastest way to get cut to pieces in a room like this is to make it personal before the math backs you. "On Tuesday at 21:08, I said. 2 men met at Canalport. A handshake carried a lane and a time. A truck arrived 2 minutes later. There's a sleeve with a signature stitch only a couple shops in the city do. One of them keeps notes for clients because they're old, school and proud. The last cuff with a stitch and this thread weight, ordered by someone named DeLuca. You can't script the sound a room makes when it stops pretending everything's fine. It's not loud. It's the opposite. It's like someone opened a freezer in the back. Matt leaned back just enough to telegraph ease. "Lots of DeLucas," he said, and let the line trail for us to fill with doubt. I didn't fill it. "Also," I said, "the guy who was supposed to MC the St. Rita auction posted an Instagram story at 8:34 with you in the frame clapping near the dessert table. Cute tux. The timestamp and location tag don't lie. It takes 32 minutes minimum to get to Canalport with that ramp closure. Longer in rain. And the footage has a handshake at 8:52. You're fast. You're not that fast." Matt didn't look at Nico. That told me more than if he'd stared. He looked at Luca like he could borrow his spine and at me like he'd like to teach me a lesson about lanes. "Which Tuesday?" he said. Casual. Except there was this tiny hairline crack in the word which. My stomach went cold because he had just asked a question that only a person who already knew there were multiple Tuesdays like this would ask. I hadn't said Tuesdays, I'd said Tuesday. It wasn't a slip normal people make. It was the kind your mouth makes when it rushes ahead of your story to where it lives in your head. Nico finally spoke. His voice was low enough to make everyone lean in a fraction. "We'll get your phones," he said to the room in general and to Matt in particular. "Personal and business. We'll check your movements last month. If there's an explanation, we'll find it." Matt's smile turned into the flat line you get when a lie realizes it needs to grow legs. "You want my phones?" he said. "You can have my phones." He held his palms out like a saint offering proof. "This is insulting, but fine. The idea that I'm out here sending trucks around my own boss? Come on." Boss. He almost never called Nico that to his face. It read like an alibi rehearsed for a different audience. I could see Nico cataloging all of it, the way people blink when they lie, the way they overcorrect with titles, the way their watch digs into their wrist when they clench a fist. His jaw moved once, a small muscle tick beneath the ear. It looked like a man chewing glass and making it look like gum. "We'll find the explanation," he said again. It sounded like a promise to the room and a warning to himself. Slick Hair found his courage after it left the building. "With respect," he said to Nico, nodding at me like I'd spilled something. "This is all very CSI, but we're talking about a cuff and a kid's drawing in traffic." I met his eyes. "We're talking about a deaf boy who notices details hearing people miss because silence teaches you to look harder. We're talking about a tailor who knows his work. And we're talking about a handshake built to hide a timetable while phones stay dark. You don't have to like it. You just have to stop pretending it's nothing because a bartender brought it in." Matt laughed then, sharp, like he'd hit his funny bone on the truth. "A bartender," he said. "That's what we're basing this on?" Nico didn't look at me. He looked at Matt the way you look at a familiar skyline and realize a building's gone. "It's what I'm basing this on," he said, "until I have reason not to." That landed like a verdict and a reprieve at once. Matt rolled his shoulders like he was shaking off rain. "Fine," he said, lighter again, reaching for that grin like a tool. "Take my phones, talk to my tailor, talk to St. Rita. You'll see. And when you do, maybe you'll stop letting outside voices mess with family." There it was, family as a weapon, family as gate. The oldest trick in the book is to make the person with the facts feel like an intruder in a house they helped keep standing. I gathered my papers because I was done bleeding for an audience that needed numbers more than feelings. "I don't want in your family," I said. "I want innocent people to stop getting killed for someone else's greed. And I want kids like Jameer to be able to sit by a river without learning what codes look like inside handshakes." He smirked like he'd found a soft spot. "Jameer," he repeated, testing the name like he could use it later. I saw Luca move before I knew I'd turned my head. Not much, just a weight shift, a small recalculation of distance. "Don't," Luca said. And the room listened because when a quiet man raises his voice a half inch, smart people stop walking. Nico stood, and the chairs did that scrape thing layered with meaning. "Phones," he said. "Now." He didn't shout. He didn't have to. He handed his own over first because leadership is the thing you do before you ask it of other people. Luca collected devices into a bakery tray like they were croissants. Matt made a show of scrolling before he powered down, like he was tiding for guests. His face was a poker face with a vein in it, when it was just the three of us and the city humming against the windows. Nico leaned on the table and stared at the butcher paper like it had a knife in it. "I grew up with him," he said, voice too even to be safe. "We learned to drive on the same stretch of empty lot behind my uncle's. He taught me to shoot left-handed. I got him out of a mess at 22. That should have ended him." He exhaled like something broke loose in his chest. "If you're wrong, I can live with being angry at you. If you're right," he stopped. I finished it for him. "If I'm right, you have to decide what kind of man you're going to be when family isn't family." I expected him to flinch. He didn't. He tapped the corner of the map with a knuckle, once, like a metronome resetting. "Pull every camera within 3 blocks, he said to Luca. "Call the tailor, quiet, and get me the tower pings, not the summaries. I want the raw data." Then to me, "Stay close to the center. If anyone shows up asking about the boy, I want to know before they finish their sentence." I nodded. I was already thinking about how to move Jameer and his mom for a week without making it look like a move. There's a way to relocate someone that says run, and a way that says vacation. We'd make it a vacation. As I reached the door, Nico said my name. When I turned, he touched his collarbone, half the sign, then stopped. A private ritual we were still learning not to break in public. "Thank you," he said, not like a boss to an employee, not like a man to a woman he owes, like a person who knows the storm already started and is grateful someone bothered to bring a map. I thought I was done talking for the day, but something mean and clean rose up in me, the kind of anger that keeps its coat on. "I thought I'd just be translating." I said. Turns out I'm here to say the quiet part out loud. I told myself I'd just drop by the river warehouse to clean up a few access issues and go make my EMT lab on time. It was one of those gray Chicago afternoons that feels like the city's holding its breath. Forklifts beeped, pallets shrink, wrapped like Christmas you don't open. Luca walked the catwalk with that lazy scan that means he'd mapped every shadow twice. Nico was on the floor in a navy pea coat, talking to a foreman about rerouting cameras so the strobes didn't blow out the image. It looked almost normal. Coffee in paper cups, union guys arguing about the bears, a food truck outside selling Italian beef like the river never swallowed secrets. I was halfway through labeling first aid kits because half of them were zip-tied shut. Great in theory. Hell in practice. When the generator hiccuped, the lights didn't die, they blinked like a lie. I felt it before I heard it. That crack that isn't a drop pallet. People who haven't heard it call it fireworks. People who have don't. Inside, Luca snapped, and I was already moving. He shoved me into a room that looked like an office until the steel door rolled and you understood the walls were thicker than guilt. Panic rooms always smell like dust and money. He pressed a code I didn't pretend to memorize, put a radio in my hand, and said, "Stay." The door sealed with a sound that said I was safe and useless. A camera feed flickered alive and gave me a bird's eye view of men who'd walked in through the loading dock like they had a key. There's a tone Nico's voice gets when he chooses calm over fear. I heard it over the radio before I saw him, heard left lane, tighten, eyes up like a metronome. Then the feed caught him spin behind a column and the bloom of red at his shoulder. The part of my brain that studies for EMT classes did the math. Arterial? No. Too slow, through and through. High. Maybe subclavian spared. The part that tends bar at 2 a.m. wanted to throw a bottle. I ran the room with my hands before I made a choice. Med kit, pry bar, breaker panel with a manual override behind a flimsy plastic cover they thought no one would notice. It's cute when men think no one will notice the obvious. I popped the panel with a butter knife from someone's sad desk drawer, slid the bar under the latch, and counted myself down. Staying put would be safe. Safe is not a plan when someone you care about is bleeding upstairs. I thought I would behave. Then I didn't. The door complained open enough for a person who's not tall. And that's the only useful thing about being fun. Size, sometimes. The hallway was low smoke and adrenaline. A kid on Nico's payroll, baby face, bad shave, in over his head, was sitting on the floor blinking like he'd just met gravity. Blood darkened the thigh of his cargo pants. He saw me and tried to stand. I dropped to my knees, ripped the kid open, and signed, "Stop." Press here because he was deaf in one ear from a firework accident, and panic steals English first. He pressed. I packed gauze deep, quick, then an Israeli bandage, tight as rent. "Hold," I told him, voice flat because calm is something you learn to fake. He nodded, eyes wet, shame already building. "Don't," I said, tapping his wrist. "You're good. You're here." He nodded again and sat up straighter like I'd handed him back his name. Nico was 20 yards down a hall that now looked like a bad dream of drywall and flicker. He was still vertical, still directing, still refusing to make a sound that sounded like pain. I slid behind a steel pallet rack as a round punched a hole where my face would have been and reached him between reloads because timing is luck and sometimes I get lucky. Up close. He was paler than he wanted anyone to notice. Coat slick at the shoulder. Breath held just a hair too long. He looked at me like I was a hallucination he liked. "You were supposed to," he started. "Nope," I said, and cut his coat with trauma shears. "We're not doing orders today." I saw entrance, saw exit, saw a lot of pretty red, and no rhythm that said artery. He had a hand on his radio and a hand on a column, and that stubborn set to his jaw that means his childhood trained him not to flinch. I shoved Quick Clot where it needed to go, apologized with my eyes, wrapped tight, leaned in, and said the only honest thing that would keep him still. "You move, you bleed, you die. You die, I kill you." He huffed a laugh and then hissed when I cinched. "Boss," Luca yelled from somewhere that sounded like metal stairs. "2 on the mezz!" I held pressure with my left hand and used my right to click Nico's radio because his fingers were turning into stubborn ice. Push left and up, I said to nobody who needed names. Mez is a funnel, shove smoke. There was a beat where no one asked who the hell I was. Then a fire extinguisher roared, white cloud blooming, and the shooting shifted the way it shifts when somebody loses angle. A guy popped up at the catwalk railing with too much confidence and a patch on his sleeve that didn't look local. He shouted something in Spanish, "Cierra la boca y cierra la luz," close enough to shut it and kill the lights. Red Serpent slang, not the usual border, town lilt. Memory filed it because I hoard things that might save me later. We moved when the room did, lines tightening like belt notches. And then, like these things often do, it ended hard and dumb. A clatter of boots, a truck door, the ugly whine of a bad clutch, and a retreat that wasn't as clean as they wanted. The silence afterward was heavier than the noise. Nico's weight sagged into the column for a breath he'd been saving. He looked at me like I'd broken a rule he wrote and expected me to apologize for it. "You disobeyed," he said, too steady to be angry and too honest to pretend he wasn't scared. "You bled," I said, because we were trading facts now, and pressed one more time to make sure the clot held. Someone brought the med bag I'd asked for over the radio, the one with the good scissors, because someone always stocks a kit with scissors that can't cut tape. And Dr. Caruso barreled in 5 minutes later smelling like antiseptic, espresso, and a career of secrets. He looked at my wrap, made a face that in his language meant not bad, and told Nico to sit. Nico did, which is how I knew he was actually worried. Stitches are their own kind of silence. Caruso worked while I held the light and pretended I didn't care when Nico's jaw tremored on the 7th pass. "You overpacked a hair," Caruso murmured, not unkindly. "But I'll take overpacked over under every day." He taped, he dressed. He handed me a Sharpie. "Time." I wrote it on the edge of the bandage because you always mark what you do when adrenaline lies later. When Caruso finally said done, the room exhaled. Someone handed me water. It tasted like victory in pennies. After, in an office that still had glass in most of the frame, Nico tried to do the thing where men wrap everything in gratitude and ask you to keep being safe for them. "Thank you," he said quietly. He meant it. "You saved my life." I leaned against the window because my legs remembered we're human. "I didn't break into your panic room to get thanked," I said. "I did it because hiding me is not a plan. If I'm going to be here, I'm not a secret, a liability, or a lucky charm you stash when things get loud. I'm either a partner or I'm gone." He went very still, not offended, taking the weight of the word. Sleep. Deprived aria runs her mouth. This was not that. This was the math of my life. "Partner means briefings," I said, counting off on fingers still stained with his blood. "No more learning things from camera feeds you didn't tell me existed. If you put me in a box, I pick the lock. If Jameer or Ms. Rivera get so much as a look from the wrong person, we moved them yesterday with real cover, not a shrug. I want a radio that works, an encrypted phone that isn't the discount version, and someone to teach me the rest of the signals so I don't get shot by your side. And one more thing. Stop asking me to be safe in a way that makes me small. I grew up small, it didn't save me." He stared at me like the ledger in his head was adding a new column he didn't know it needed. Luca, who'd forgotten how to pretend he doesn't listen, hovered in the hall with his arms crossed like a bouncer at the door of my future. Nico nodded, once, a decision landing. "Luca," he said, eyes still on me, "get her a radio. Full access channel. No filters, put her on the op briefs. If anyone has a problem, they can talk to me about it for the rest of their short careers." Luca handed me a Motorola like a priest handing a Bible and tried not to grin. Nico slid a slim black phone across the desk and a key card with my name already printed. I don't know when he printed it. I know he'd been carrying it like a choice. "Dr. Caruso," Nico said, half turning. "Give her your direct. If I'm not reachable, she is." Caruso gave me a number written in a surgeon's neat script, then patted my shoulder like he would a resident he liked. "You did good," he said. Don't do everything. I'll try, I said, and we both heard the lie and let it pass. We dealt with the details: body count, perimeter, the truck they'd abandoned 2 blocks east, the angle the camera caught a tattoo on a wrist someone would recognize later. And then we were alone again, in a room that still hummed with what almost happened. Nico's face softened in that way it only does when no one else is in range. I've been taught my whole life to put what I love in a safe and throw away the key, he said. It kept a lot of things from breaking. It broke other things I didn't see. He lifted his good hand, not quite touching my arm. You're not a thing, he said. You're a person who just told me how to be better and proved it by keeping me breathing. I let my head tip against the glass and watched gulls chase nothing over the river, dumb and relentless. I thought I'd be the girl on the milk crate forever, I said. Pour, smile, dodge the comments, count quarters. Turns out I'm the person with a map and a radio in a room full of men who finally shut up and listened. He huffed a laugh that had more gratitude than humor. Partners, he said, trying the word on like a coat and finding it fit. Partners, I said back. The generator hummed, the light steadied for the first time in an hour, and somewhere in the building someone started sweeping up glass because that's what you do here after any kind of storm. You clean, you count, you write down the time, and you decide how you're going to live with what didn't kill you. The week after the warehouse hit felt like someone turned the city's volume down but left the bad parts humming. I kept working doubles at Blue Tilt to look normal and spent the rest of my hours at the foundation cleaning up systems. Strobes installed, lever handles swapped, a text, only line that actually gets answered, while Nico rebuilt his perimeter like a guy patching a boat he knows still wants to leak. Every quiet minute made the question louder. If Matt was the leak, how do you prove it without giving him a chance to make you the crazy one? I'm not a cop and I'm not a soldier, but I know how to run a clean test. You change one variable at a time, and you do it in silence, so the results can't claim they heard it somewhere else. I called it a safety drill because everybody pretends to like those. We told the docs we were stress testing evacuation routes after the generator hiccup, which nobody argued with because OSHA exists and because everyone just watched a war break out under fluorescent lights. I booked a fire inspector who owed Ms. Rivera a favor from a fundraiser she ran years ago. He showed up with a clipboard and the kind of belly that says trustworthy in this town. Then I split the organization into 3 groups and gave each group a slightly different paper map for where our sensitive materials would be staged for the drill. No emails, no texts, no radios. Face to face only. In the same room, we'd turned into a Faraday cage with a roll of copper mesh Luca borrowed from a contractor. I signed the directions to each group while speaking nonsense about hydrant valves out loud, so anyone recording got garbage audio. And I tagged each map with a microscopic dot of blue Sharpie in a different corner. 3 maps, 3 lane numbers, 3 time windows. Kelly got lane 3 at 7:10, Luca's crew got lane 4 at 7:25, and Matt, smiling like a man who wants you to think he isn't worried, got lane 6 at 7:20. I also missigned one tiny thing for his group on purpose. I tilted my wrist left when the cue should tilt right, a harmless mistake that would only matter if someone repeated it exactly. If the leak got out, I wanted to see my fingerprint on it. We moved Jameer and his mom out of Pilsen for the day with a field trip cover that made everybody feel normal. The Shed Aquarium has exactly the kind of lighting and sound a deaf kid can enjoy without wanting to crawl out of his skin. And Ms. Rivera knows a security guard there who lets her bring a cousin's class in off peak if she brings pan dulce. The text I sent her was plain: have fun, send me penguin pics. She sent back a selfie with a beluga and 2 thumbs up. If anyone asked, it looked like a Saturday. At 6:50, the river yard felt like Chicago always feels when weather's trying to decide if it's rain or attitude. Forklifts beeped. The custodian swore at an uncooperative dumpster, and somewhere a radio tried to find the end of a Springsteen song. I kept my eyes off lane 6 because the body knows how to look where the head is scared to. Nico shadowed the catwalk in a plain jacket, the dressing on his shoulder hidden under a blousey button. Up, that made him look like he'd lost a bet to a stylist. Luca posted our people where scrutiny looks like boredom. A guy eating sunflower seeds near lane 4. a woman scrolling her phone by the porta, John like she'd seen worse nights. Two union stewards arguing about the Sox bullpen in a way that could turn into a takedown if it had to. We didn't tell them everything. We told them enough. At 7:17, a box truck slipped through the south gate like it hoped the cameras were napping. No logo. Cheap magnet sign with a fake plumbing company name. The kind that peels if you stare. It drifted past lane 3 where Kelly's map had pointed, paused like it was thinking, then rolled steady to lane 6 and idled. My stomach did the thing it does when you're about to either vomit or win. Two men got out. The first wore a cap low, and a gate that said he learned to run before he learned to read. The second looked up at the mezzanine once, as if doors could look back. They clasped hands, the way men do when they think they're invisible. And I watched the wrist tilt left on a cue that should tilt right. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. My blue dot had walked itself into a handshake. We let them move 20 feet because proof feels better when it hangs itself. Then Luca's union stewards were on them, like that's what they were born to do. No bravado, just efficient, joints and leverage, zip ties that don't care who your cousin is. The truck driver swore in Spanish with a Sonoran slide. The other hissed a word the Ferraro boys use when they think they've been clever. I heard both and pocketed them for later. Nico didn't move until the cuffs were on. He descended like he always descends. No rush, full gravity, and looked at the men the way you look at roaches you don't want to smash on your own floor. "Who sent you?" he asked. They stared at me like maybe the girl would be their angle. I signed sit, quiet, and nobody laughed. We brought the captives into a room that still smelled faintly of the bleach I'd used to clean blood, and I set the 3 maps on the table without commentary. Kelly's with its dot, Luca's with his, and the one with the dot in the top right corner, the one that only 3 people had seen, none of whom were standing on my side of the table right now. I tilted my own wrist left and watched their eyes follow like dogs. If I were the vengeful type, I would have enjoyed it. It didn't feel like joy. It felt like a diagnosis landing. Luca took their phones and slid them into a Faraday pouch like he was bagging evidence he'd never turn in. If this were a movie, Matt would have walked in sweating and saying sorry, or he would have run. Real life is messier. He arrived 10 minutes late. No hurry, hair neat, eyes clear, carrying 2 coffees because a man carrying coffee reads as helpful even when he's a lit match. He took in the room, the zip ties, the maps, me, Nico, the small quiet of people who have the thing they need. He set the coffees down, hands steady, and looked at the dot in the top right corner like it might blink. "This what we're doing today?" he said. "We catching plumbers?" I watched his left wrist. People betray themselves in the wrists. "You'll get to make your case," Nico said, even, as if this were a union hearing and not a slow fall off a tall building. "But first, you'll hand over the sat phone you keep for when you don't want tower pings." Matt smiled the smile that got him out of some teenage ticket, I'm sure. "Sat phone," he repeated, amused. "I barely have time to charge the one I use." "Check his truck," Luca said, and one of our union stewards already moving stopped to wait for the order to finish, then kept going. Matt chuckled like he loved that we were thorough. "Am I supposed to be offended? You tear apart my life because a bartender likes mixing languages?" The word bartender shouldn't have stung. It did. Not because it made me small, but because it was meant to. I slid the photo I had printed, tailor stitch, cuff in good light, across the table. "I called your tailor," I said. "He didn't say your name. He doesn't do that. He said he rarely sees anyone ask for left, hand-functional buttonholes on a right, dominant cut. I do. It's a tell. You like to play with details only 5 people notice." His jaw twitched. "You're giving a lot of a damn about buttonholes." "Details are where the murders hide," I said, and his eyes flicked to the men in zip ties like he wanted to argue with the word. He didn't. The sat phone wasn't in his truck. It was behind the 3rd ceiling tile in the hallway outside this room, wrapped in a rag like contraband gum. Luca dropped it onto the table with a soft thunk that felt louder than any gunshot I'd heard this month. Matt looked at it the way you look at a spider you didn't see until it's on your hand. Then he laughed, sharp, the kind that turns into a cough when you can't breathe. You planted that. He didn't sound convinced. Nico didn't blink. Pick it up, he said. Matt didn't. Pick it up, Nico repeated, and every man in the room heard the old version of him inside that instruction. Matt lifted the phone like it might bite. It buzzed in his hand. One lonely satellite ping in a room that shouldn't get reception. The number was a string of zeros in a country code I didn't recognize. The message preview read in block letters, L6 1920. My left wrist itched. It's one thing to suspect. It's another to hear the universe ring your trap with a bell. I wanted to say a lot of things. I wanted to ask why. And I also didn't care, because why always sounds like an excuse when the math is this clean. Matt looked at Nico then, finally, like two boys on that empty lot behind the uncle's shop, keys in palms, futures small and loud. He tried one last door. We can fix this, he said, voice almost kind. You and me, behind closed doors. We make a deal. We move product. We keep the city quiet the way your father did when he wasn't trying to be a priest. Nico didn't look away. My father died thinking loyalty meant never asking questions. I'm not dying like that. Matt's smile died slow. You kill me. You start a war, he said, and looked at me as if I'd flinch at the word. I didn't. I thought about Jameer with the penguins and Ms. Rivera trading pan dulce for an hour of peace. Nico dismissed the room with a nod that meant get out unless your name is in my mouth. They got out. Even Luca, who hated it. The door closed and there was only our breathing and the river and the weight of a decision that would teach everyone in earshot how the future was going to feel. Nico rubbed his thumb once along the edge of the bandage under his shirt, and then put both hands flat on the table like he wanted fingerprints to tell the truth. You're expecting me to put a bullet in you, he said to Matt. You want me to. You want me to be the man you know how to fight. Matt held steady. It would be a mercy, he said, which is the kind of sentence that cleans itself up on the way out. I spoke because silence felt like complicity. Mercy isn't always soft, I said. Sometimes it's slow and humiliating and exactly what you earned. They both looked at me like I had set a fourth map on the table. Take his name, I said to Nico, and felt the room lean toward the idea. Freeze his accounts, salt his contacts, make every friend who ever owed him anything have to explain themselves to you. Put him somewhere he can't buy a drink, can't rent a car, can't get a package delivered in his own name. Strip the edges off his life until it's a circle with no doors. He breathes, he eats, he wakes up to the same small square of sky. He never uses that left wrist trick again because there's no one left to notice. Matt scoffed on reflex. Exile, he said, trying to make it sound like a vacation. That's cute, I looked at Nico. It's work, I said, but it builds something. It tells the city you can be dangerous without being stupid. Nico's face did that softening that makes me worry for him and proud at the same time. He stared at Matt like a doctor staring at a tumor, and then at the window like the river might vote. When he looked back, the decision was already standing in the room waiting to be named. You don't die today, he said. Matt's shoulders loosened a fraction before Nico finished. You're done. You don't come back. You don't touch my people, my docks, my air. You don't look at anyone who's looked at me. Every account you have, real, fake, grandma's mattress, goes dark. Every favor you ever called in gets reversed. The only thing you own is the knowledge that you lost everything while breathing. Matt tried to grin and ran out of face. You think you can keep that up forever? He asked. And for the first time I heard what sounded like fear. Forever's not real, I said. But long enough is. He looked at me with something I couldn't name and didn't care to. Luca came back with 2 men I trust more than I trust lock codes. Papers were signed that make doors lock all by themselves. A car idled the way cars idle when they're headed for a far place with cheap motels and a lot of silence. Matt turned at the threshold and finally looked like the boy who learned to drive beside Nico. You'll regret this, he said. Nico didn't blink. Every day I don't becomes the life I'm trying to build. When the car taillights disappeared, the warehouse sounded like after any storm. Brooms, muttering, someone counting inventory wrong. The two tied men were gone to a place where they'd be persuaded to pick a future that didn't end in body bags. I stood with my hands on the table between the three maps and felt my anger quiet into something steadier. Nico came to stand beside me, not in front of me, and we watched the river catch the first hard drops of a rain that had finally decided to fall. "I wanted to be the man who ends problems," he said softly, "not the man who teaches them a lesson." "You did both," I said, "and you did it without becoming the problem." He nodded like that hurt in a good way. "We'll have to be twice as careful now," he said. "3 times," I corrected, and he laughed, real and tired. My phone buzzed with a penguin selfie and a caption that read, "He smiles with his whole face." I showed it to Nico. He touched his collarbone without thinking, that little half sign that started all this, and breathed out like maybe, just maybe, the city had one less bad habit and one more chance. The meeting was set for a Tuesday because Chicago loves patterns. It makes the city feel predictable even when it isn't. The restaurant was the kind of old school spot in the theater district that's been remodeled so many times, the wood paneling remembers different arguments. You know the place, photos of ball players and mayors, a framed Tribune review yellowing by the coat room, Sinatra on a loop just loud enough to make men lean in. We showed up early because control looks like being first through a door and checking what kind of metal the hinges are. A stagehand from the next block over worked the door wand like he'd been asked to volunteer and paid in meatballs. "Phones in the basket, weapons declared, nobody's cute," he said, and nobody argued. Nico handed over a compact pistol. Luca surrendered something that looked like it could stop a truck, and I slid my work phone into a felt pouch the owner swore was a Faraday bag. I kept the encrypted line tucked in my blazer because paranoia pays rent. We got the back room, red leather banquette, too many mirrors, exit sign humming in the corner like a nervous habit. I chose the seat with my back to the wall. I'm not brave, I'm not stupid either. Ferraro sent a man who could be 60 or immortal. Sharp suit, eyes like he'd miscounted nothing in 40 years. He took the head of the table without asking, the way people do when they're used to being the last voice in a room. Red Serpent sent a guy in his early 40s, Jim, strong, a San Judas chain glinting under his open collar, tattoos peeking like cliff notes of a life. They brought 2 each for security and 0 smiles. The owner's nephew poured Pellegrino like it was holy water and fled. The talk started in English because that's how these things pretend to be civilized. Ferraro's man, he introduced himself as Signor Valli, like we should know the name, opened with the kind of compliment that's an insult in a tuxedo. "You defended your house well," he said, hands calm on the table. "But defense is not a business plan." Nico's mouth did the almost smile that means he heard the threat and filed it with receipts. "Neither is trespassing," he said. I stayed quiet, hands loose, interpreter face on, and waited for the part where words started breathing. The thing about negotiating with men like this is they never say the thing they mean. They send it by courier in phrases they learned before Google. Valli slipped into Italian when the room needed to feel smaller. "Parliamo chiaro." Let's speak clearly. "Tagliare la testa al toro." Cut the bull's head, i.e., stop dithering. And once, softly, "Giocare su 2 tavoli," which literally reads like playing at 2 tables and means what you think it means. I didn't translate that one word for word because what he meant was, "We will hedge if you let us." And what Nico needed to hear was, "They're ready to double dip unless you lock the doors." The Serpent's rep, he called himself Rivas like we were filling out forms, stayed in English until he didn't, dropping into Spanish when he wanted to hide impatience. "Apretamos la plaza," he said. Tighten the plaza, squeeze the territory. Then cocked his head at me to test if I'd feed that to Nico straight or flavored. I did both. He says they'll tighten their hold. He means he wants taxes without pushback. Rivas smiled with half his face. She's good, he said. You pay her enough? Nico didn't look away. Not yet, he said. They laid out their ask, like reasonable men buying a house with bad comps, split the West Side routes, joint stewardship of a slice of the docks. Some say in which trucks can pass without being stopped to empty. It sounded clean if you didn't know what clean costs. They argued they were security by another name, that their presence prevented outside wolves. Valli's Italian warmed up around the edges when he talked risk, tenere la calma del mare, keep the sea calm, and cooled when he talked price. Riva sat forward when money got mentioned and leaned back when loss did, a rhythm that told me which lever mattered. I started taking 2 notes for every statement, what the word said and what the body argued. It's like running 2 radios at once and deciding which channel is lying less. Half an hour in, I asked for water and used the reaching for the carafe moment to catch Nico's eye and sign small under the table. They don't trust each other. He twitched a fingertip. See what they want most. So I asked Valli about timing, how soon they'd need access to actually see relief, and he gave me a proverb instead of a number. A tavola non si invecchia. At the table one does not grow old, meaning he could sit here all night. That's an old man's flex. When I asked Rivas about oversight, who he'd answer to if someone broke terms, he rolled a shoulder. Mi clica, he said. My crew. Code for no one above me can tell me no. There's your hairline crack. I pressed it by translating with less perfume. He answers to his clique, not to you. I told Valli in English. Valli's mouth thinned. In a room like this, telling one side the other side won't be controlled is a gift, or a knife. We took a beat like civilized people, and ate bread no one wanted. I thought about the kid at the center who won't go near the river now, and about how fairness, like flossing, gets talked up and skipped. When we came back to it, I did the thing Nikki at community college taught me before she dropped out to care for her dad. You anchor a frame on values they can say out loud, even if you know their hearts don't live there. No schools, no churches, no clinics, I said, like I was reading an ordinance. No operations within 2 blocks of the deaf center. Anything near the river obeys a noise cap after 10. No minors. No fentanyl. If you can't say yes to any of that, we don't have a deal. We have a funeral line. Valli lifted a hand as if to say of course, and then tried to trade around the edges. Riva scoffed at 2 blocks and wanted 1. I told him a story about a kid and a penguin and didn't smile. He took the 2. Then we pushed terms that would actually move needles. I wanted joint security that looked like OSHA, safety checks that are really audits, random lane inspections run by a third party everyone hates equally, a manifest system for any shared shipments with the kind of paper trail that makes lying expensive. I wanted a kill, switch for the handshake code, if any of those cues show up again. Every deal here burns. I said it straight. You keep using that little left wrist trick? Meetings over, trucks stopped, phones ringing at 3 a.m. until your teeth hurt. Rivas tried, we don't need training wheels. I said, call them bumpers, Chicago loves bowling. It earned me exactly half a grin from Valli, which means we were inside his threshold for offended. At some point, the owner himself slid in like an usher to murmur that if anyone was going to throw a chair, he'd prefer we use the old ones. That's Chicago. Even our threats come with maintenance notes. We kept to words. The money part went the way money parts go. Percentages floated, receded, came back with new names and fewer zeros. Nico gave ground where it buys peace and planted flags where erosion kills you. And every time Rivas tried to notch a silent win with a euphemism, I unwrapped it. Cobro de piso, he said once. Velvet, soft, floor tax. Extortion, I said. He didn't correct me. When the bones of something livable were finally on paper. I set the last condition in the middle of the table, like a cup of black coffee you either drink or don't. Matt DeLuca stays gone, I said, not a request. No shelter, no subcontract, no shadow invites. He's not a bargaining chip. He's a cautionary tale. Valli's eyes flickered with annoyance that read as opportunity lost. Rivas shrugged. That cartel shrug that says a man is a tool until he isn't. Ese güey ya fue, he said. That dude's already over. Vali nodded once like he was signing for a package. He made his choices, he said, and I watched a sliver of something like contempt cut through his calm. They'd have used him if they could. They couldn't. The room got cleaner. Oh, vibe. Nico spoke then, not like a threat, not like a plea, just the terms of a ceasefire that could hold if rage didn't eat it first. You stop testing my doors, he said. You move your product where we agree. You handle your people when they get stupid. In return, you get routes that don't bleed. And you don't find your trucks on the news after an anonymous call about a suspicious load. You violate, we double the cost before we end the conversation. He didn't look at me, but I felt him ask for the last translation to carry weight. I gave it steel without decoration. Signatures went on a paper that wasn't legally binding but had its own kind of court. We shook hands in a room with no knives on the table because we checked them at the door. Vali said, "Speriamo bene," let's hope for the best. And I didn't translate the hope part because hope isn't policy. Rivas tucked his chain back under his shirt like he remembered someone told him once that faith works better when you don't show it off. The owner's nephew brought cannoli because theater district men believe sugar ends wars. Nobody ate. Outside, Randolph was buzzing with theatergoers checking their phones for scores and Ubers. An L train screamed past like a warning and then receded. Luca lit a cigarette he didn't smoke and didn't inhale. You read them like a book, he said. They're not a book, I said. They're a group chat with bad reception. Nico looked at me like he wanted to say a dozen things and chose one. You called extortion extortion in front of men who usually call it tradition, he said. You realize that? Yeah, I said. Somebody had to start using the right words. He touched his collarbone, that private hab sign, and then let his hand drop because the sidewalk had eyes. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. We'd gotten the thing we came for, a fragile piece wrapped in conditions and teeth. It wasn't pretty. It was something we could live in if we kept the lights checked and the exits clear. On the ride back, the driver took Wabash to dodge a jam on State, and we passed a line outside a comedy club where a guy with a mic was warming up the crowd with Cubs jokes even though everyone knows better. The city felt almost normal for 2 lights. I thought about what we'd asked and what we'd gotten and about the next test, because there's always a next test. I texted Ms. Rivera, "Quiet tonight, keep the penguin pics coming." She sent back a photo of Jameer signing win with both hands. I showed Nico. He looked at the screen like it was a verdict he could live with, and then out the window at a city that would swallow us if we let it. We bought time, he said. Not triumphant, not scared. Let's spend it right. The first week after the deal, the city felt like it exhaled, not peace. Chicago doesn't do peace. But the hum got lower, like a fridge finally fixed. Nico didn't celebrate. He went straight into paperwork. Which is how you know he's serious. The man who used to solve problems with a phone call started sitting with a CPA who looks like a youth pastor and a labor attorney who keeps extra reading glasses in her hair. He renamed 2 companies, no more family name on the door, and applied for a distribution license that requires patience and a tolerance for acronyms: DOT, OSHA, FSMA, IN. I watched him sign forms with his good hand and remembered the first night I saw him, all edges and gravity and thought. Look at you choosing slow money on purpose. He'd glance up sometimes like it might be wrong to be proud of this. And I'd squeeze his knee under the table and keep reading the fine print so he didn't have to do it alone. We turned the warehouse into something that could pass a surprise inspection without anyone needing to run. New lighting, no shadow pockets. Mirrors where corners used to be blind. Actual training logs instead of a clipboard someone fills out in the car after. I wrote an orange binder called How Not to Die or Get Sued, and the guys made fun of the title until it kept them from backing a forklift into a fuel line. Sunday school. Luca called the morning session where I taught basic ASL for safety. Stop, wait, go, danger, help. And the hand shape for fire, because shouting is noise and noise is chaos, and hands cut through both. First day, 3 of the old-timers sat with their arms crossed like they'd been sent to detention. One of them, Sal, with the knee brace and a mouth like a switchblade, said, "We ain't waving at each other when things get hot," I said. "I'm not asking you to wave. I'm asking you to not die, because the generator drowns you out." 10 minutes later, the drill hit. The siren glitched into a low moan, and Luca flashed stop across the bay. Sal froze. A pallet swung wide and missed his leg by an inch. He glanced at me and didn't smile, but the next morning he signed coffee before he spoke and brought donuts like a truce. We cleaned the docs and the books at the same time. Kelly, who had once believed marketing could fix anything, now lives in spreadsheets. She found 3 shell invoices that smelled like old smoke, and we lit them on fire in a legal sense. When I said we needed a code for "this looks wrong," that wouldn't sound like snitching, Luca suggested "check" with 2 taps, and we put it on a poster like it was OSHA scripture. You'd be surprised how many tough men like having a rule to point at when they want to say no. It's policy, they say, as if policy came down from a mountain instead of being invented by a bartender with a binder and a guy who once broke someone's nose for looking at him wrong. City Hall is a whole other world. We stood in line so long behind a woman trying to open a nail salon that I memorized the permit fee table. And Nico kept checking the clock, like if he stared at it hard enough, the hand would jump. The clerk at the window had this Cubs mug and a vibe like she's seen every scam since Harold Washington. She raised an eyebrow at our LLC names, then leaned in when I signed "please" and "thank you" out of habit, and asked if we'd added strobes to our safety system. "Yes," I said, and she nodded like that explained a lot. You don't expect kindness at a permit counter. She slid our forms back with a sticky note that said, "Call O'Malley Inspections. She's fair." We called. Inspector O'Malley showed up 2 days later with boots that have known winter, and a tape measure she treats like a wand. She clocked our strobes, our lever handles, the marked quiet room, and said, "Most people only do this when they're afraid of a lawsuit. You look like you mean it." Nico said, "We do." And something in her face softened. She flagged a couple fixes, knocked twice on a new exit bar, and promised to push our certificate because we weren't making her job harder. It felt like cheating to have someone on the city side not treat us like a joke. It wasn't cheating. It was the cost of finally doing things right. The foundation shifted too. We built a skills program that doesn't just teach soft things, it pays. Forklift certification for deaf teens with interpreters in steel toe boots, intro to cold, chain logistics with a field trip to a produce market at 4 a.m., so kids can see what fresh actually means. We bought a label printer that talks to your phone for folks with mobility issues and got Ms. Rivera to consult on making the intake forms not hostile. I made a sign for the door that says, in English and ASL illustrations, "We don't need heroes. We need paychecks." Jameer became our unofficial QA. He spots hazard tape that's 2 inches too short from across the room like an eagle and collects mistake stickers like trading cards. He still won't go near the river, and that's fine. He helps us read it from a distance. Nico had harder days than he admits. There's a special frustration in watching the money slow down after you've made the moral choice. He'd stare out at the dock some afternoons, like the river owed him back pay. One night when I got home from a shift at Blue Tilt. Yes, I still take a shift sometimes because I like being useful in ways that have nothing to do with him. He was at the kitchen island with 3 spreadsheets open and a frown so deep it looked permanent. Our new place is a gray stone in Ravenswood that doesn't echo gunfire memories. The block does block parties, and someone always gives you zucchini in August. "We're going to bleed," he said, honest in the way that counts. "For months, maybe a year. It's the right direction. It's just—" He didn't finish. "It's slow." I made us boxed mac and cheese because expensive pasta is a lie at midnight, and we ate leaning on our elbows like kids. "Slow is sticky," I said. "Fast money leaves scorch marks. Slow money lets you sleep." He nodded and didn't argue, which is how I knew the doubt was passing, not settling in. Some of the guys fought the culture shift until the 4th of July solved it for me. Fireworks were already illegal. And everywhere. The sound turns the city inside out. We kept operations minimal that night and posted big signs about ear protection and quiet zones anyway. Right after sunset, a series went off too close, and the new kid from back of the yards dropped his radio and started to spiral. He's not deaf, but trauma doesn't care. Voices got louder. which made it worse. I walked up, signed breathe because my hands go there before my mouth, and he latched onto it like a rope. Luca took a knee and signed ugly but clear with you because he's been practicing in the break room with YouTube and me. The kid matched us. His breathing came back. The bay quieted. Sal, of all people, told a story about a summer in the 90s when a Roman candle factory went up near his cousin's place, and every car alarm in 3 zip codes sang for an hour. Everybody laughed because laughing is a pressure valve. After that, no one rolled their eyes at stop or safe again. Sometimes a city holiday is also a training. We started buying small pieces of clean businesses like we were building a weird American dream out of secondhand parts. A cold storage corner in Bridgeport. A minority investment in a legit import shop out by O'Hare, where the owner cares more about mangoes staying at temp than your last name. A local trucking outfit with an old school dispatcher who calls everyone kiddo and runs on caffeine and spite. We sponsored a Little League team under the new logistics name, nothing with Moretti on it, and I nearly cried when I saw a kid on third base flashing hold to the batter because his coach thought it was a neat way to teach signals. Their uniforms say North Branch on the back and smell like grass and Twizzlers. Tell me that isn't better than watching the news for your name. Inside the crew, something else settled. The gatekeeping I used to do because Nico was bleeding and men were panicking turned into actual responsibility that had my name on it. I ran intel briefs with a whiteboard and a timer because grown men respect a timer more than a calendar. We kept the kill. Switch clause in play. Any sighting of the left. Wrist handshake shuts down any cooperation for a week. No exceptions, no debates. And it only had to happen once before the Ferraro guy stopped pretending he didn't know what I meant. I put a tiny sticker of a penguin in the corner of the board every time we hit a week with 0 ambulance calls. People noticed the penguins. Jameer would come by and tap them, proud like he installed safety himself. One afternoon, Inspector O'Malley came back to check our fixes and found half a dozen men lined up in the break room practicing thank you on each other with plastic cups in their hands. She raised both eyebrows and looked at me. "You start a trend, Ms. Lane?" I shrugged. We got tired of shouting. She smirked and signed back good in a clumsy way that made the guys grin. Later, she pulled me aside and said, "There are places I walk into where everything feels uphill. This doesn't. Keep it that way." It's small, but small things stack. Nico and I talked more about Elena, his mother. Those nights the house was quiet and the streetlight threw a soft line across the floor. He told me she used to make him practice introductions in the mirror so he wouldn't mumble, and that she believed in 2 kinds of strength, the kind that breaks and the kind that builds. "I've been good at the first kind," he said, eyes on our ceiling like it had answers. "I want to be good at the second." I touched his collarbone, the sign that found us both, and he breathed like the room was big enough again. We're not naive. Deals crack. People test fences. There are still mornings I wake up to my phone buzzing with something that needs a drive, a call, a map. But the ratio changed. There are more days where the worst thing that happens is a shipment of berries goes soft because somebody ignored the thermometer, and we spend an hour solving fruit instead of fury. There are more nights where Blue Tilt runs a deaf-friendly jazz set with captions on a small screen by the stage, and a house band that learned to watch hands as much as heads. There's a tip jar labeled interpreters, and the regulars fill it without making speeches. I still pour drinks for men who think fun size is a personality, and I still smile that smile that doesn't reach my eyes. But now one of our forklift guys will lean over and sign ignore behind them, and I'll sign back always. And the night moves on. If you ask me what changed, I could show you contracts and binders and city certificates framed cheap in our office. But the easiest answer is the block party in August. The grills were out, the kids were sticky. Someone's uncle had a band that only knows 3 chords. And Luca's niece, who is deaf and had been watching us all summer with a scientist's stare, walked up to the folding table where we were handing out lemonade and signed home with both hands, slow and certain. "Home?" I asked, because you never assume. She nodded, pointed at the street, the warehouse past the trees, then at me and Nico together. I felt something in my chest line up. Nico saw it too. He touched his collarbone. half the sign. Then finished it for the first time in public. Not loud. True. And for a second, the city, the loud, broken, beautiful city, felt like it could be that word without anyone having to flinch. Mount Carmel doesn't sneak up on you. It rises out of hillside like the past decided to set up permanent camp. The sky was that hard Midwestern blue that makes every headstone look sharper. We parked by a row of old cypresses, and Nico carried a small bouquet he'd bought from a guy with a folding table and a socks cap who said, "Cash only," like a prayer. The air smelled like cut grass and car exhaust from the Eisenhower a stone's throw away. He didn't say much on the walk in, just kept his good hand in his coat pocket where he hides nerves. And the other one brushed mine every few steps like a reminder we were doing this together. Elena's stone was simple. No angels or drama, just a name, 2 dates, and the kind of dash you can spend your life arguing with. Someone had left a rosary looped over the top. Someone else had tucked a tiny White Sox pin in the grass, like a secret handshake with the dead. He set the flowers down, stood there a beat that felt longer, and then talked to her the way men talk when they forget anyone else can hear. He told her about the warehouse deal and the school zone rules and the inspections that didn't end in shouting. He told her about Jameer and the penguins, the way the city quieted in small, honest patches. He told her about me, not like a trophy, more like a person who showed up and refused to leave when it got loud. I stood a step back and let him have it, the way you do when someone is trying to thread a needle across time. After a while, he turned and touched his collarbone, that small sign we tripped over at the start, and looked like he was about to jump off a cliff he'd been measuring for months. I said the thing I say when I can't fix anything, but I'm staying. I'm here. And he nodded, like that gave the ground permission to hold. He reached in his pocket and pulled out a little box that didn't need a commercial to explain itself. My brain went weirdly practical. Rent, laundry, the grocery list stuck to our fridge with a magnet from a hot dog stand. And then went quiet because he opened it. And the ring was a simple platinum band with a small diamond set low like it wanted to work for a living. Inside the band, this part killed me, was a tiny engraving of the ASL with hand shape. 2 linked curves you'd miss if you didn't know what you were looking at. And next to it, the word partner in letters so small, I felt like only we were meant to read it. "I've been trying to find the right moment," he said. "Rough around the edges, no big speech. And I realized there isn't one. There's just the true one." He drew a breath like it might catch and didn't let it. "Marry me, Arya. Build this with me. Not because it's safe, because it's us." I thought I'd make a joke to break the tension, something dumb about him finally learning to read municipal forms without crying. But I put my hand out and it didn't shake, which is its own kind of answer. "Yes," I said, and the word landed in my chest like relief. He slid the ring on, and the diamond didn't scream. It sat there like a fact. We didn't kiss like a movie. We were at his mother's grave, and the expressway sighed, and a plane headed for O'Hare cut across the sky, and we stood still and let quiet do the heavy lifting. He put his forehead to mine, and I closed my eyes. And for a second I remembered my mom humming to the TV in a rented kitchen and thought, okay, this is the part where you choose your family on purpose. He wanted a picture to send to exactly 3 people. Luca, who would grunt and text back a penguin. Kelly, who would cry and call me sis even though we aren't. And Ms. Rivera, because she earned it. We took it with the stone behind us and our hands in the frame, my ring catching the hard sun. He didn't post it, that's not him. He pocketed the phone like a secret, and looked lighter in a way I hadn't seen since I met him. On the way out, we passed a man teaching his little boy to ride a bike down the cemetery road, because that's the kind of city this is. Practical, a little inappropriate, alive next to the dead. The kid wobbled, overcorrected, and laughed with his whole face when he didn't fall. "Good sign," I said. "Best," he said, and grinned like he'd been saving it. We drove back with the windows cracked to let the smell of grass stick to us. At a light near a Portillo's, he asked if the ring felt weird, not like he could take it back. Just checking. I told him weird was a chair you don't sit in. This feels like the spot in the couch that's already got our shape in it. He reached over and traced width on my palm with his thumb, the tiniest motion. And I felt something in me go steady. We swung by Blue Tilt because I'd promised Vince I'd cover the late jazz set, and because keeping promises is how you keep being yourself. The bar was packed without being stupid. The trumpeter was playing like he'd made up new ribs for his horn. And the caption screen I'd bullied Vince into installing glowed at the corner of the stage with the words moving roughly in time with the music. A couple deaf regulars sat by the brick wall where the bass vibration feels like weather. Jameer's mom waved and I waved back and signed later picture, like a kid with good news. Nico didn't hide in a corner. He took a table where anyone who wanted to look could see him. He ordered club soda, because he's trying to live long enough to see the end of the slow plan. And he rested his left hand on the table so the ring could catch exactly one sliver of neon for the people who notice slivers. I sang 2 songs because I still sing when I need to remember I'm more than the rooms I control. And when I finished the second, the bar didn't get louder or softer. It held me in that mid-volume way that says, "We see you." Vince did a double take at my hand, then pretended he hadn't. On my break. A woman from a table near the back stopped me to ask if our interpreter jar was still a thing. And when I said yes, she dropped a 20 and said her sister's kid is learning please and thank you and no. And it made dinners at their house less exhausting. The jar had a penguin sticker on it now. Jameer added it because he thinks everything good should have a mascot. Later, when the set ended and the regulars did their goodbye routine, the one where they promised to be good and mean it for a few hours, we walked down Damen with 2 go coffees and our breath making small clouds. He asked, half shy, half serious, if I ever thought I'd end up here. And I said the truest thing I could find. I didn't think I'd end up anywhere. I thought I'd keep moving until I fell asleep. He nodded like he knew that weather. What about regret? He asked. It wasn't a trap. It was a man measuring his life. I told him I regret the time I lost thinking small kept me safe, and the years I said yes to things that only saw me as a body in a place. I told him I don't regret a single hard conversation that made us better, including the ones where I made him angry. He laughed at that, then got quiet, and said he didn't regret the slow money because he sleeps, and he didn't know if he ever did before. On the corner, under a streetlight that flickers like it has opinions, he signed home without thinking, and I signed yes back and added together because sometimes the corniest words are the only ones that stick. The city wasn't fixed. It won't be. Deals crack. Fences get tested. A man we exiled still wakes up somewhere with a chip the size of a state line. But we built a shape we can live inside. A house where the rules are written in hands and teeth. Where mercy doesn't mean weakness. Where being vulnerable is just being honest about what you're willing to carry. We'll mess up again. We'll fix it faster. We'll teach more men to sign stop and more kids to sign win at Little League. We'll keep the kill. Switch claws taped above the whiteboard and the penguin sticker on the corner like luck you made yourself. And on the days the noise gets loud, because it will, one of us will touch a collarbone, small and certain, and the other will know exactly what that means.